Hi everybody, my name is Ted Mitchell. I'm the president of the American Council on Education. Delighted to be here today, and I'm going to talk a little bit about higher education and democracy, two things that ought to go together seamlessly, but right now we're having a little trouble.
Welcome to the third seminar of the 23rd season of Seminars at Steamboat. I'm Mitch Wallerstein, the chair of the board of seminars. We have hit our mid-season stride with another timely and important talk this evening with Dr. Ted Mitchell, who is the president of the American Council on Education. Given the attacks that the major research universities across the country have recently encountered, involving threatened or actual withdrawal of hundreds of millions of dollars of research support, as well as other punitive measures, it appears that the very institutions that have made America preeminent in science, technology, and medicine are endangered, and there is the potential for irreparable damage. So, including this week, Columbia University's decision to capitulate and to pay a $100 million fine, there is much for Dr. Mitchell to talk about tonight. As you may know, the mission of Seminars at Steamboat is to present nonpartisan talks on a range of current public policy topics. And these are both domestic and international in nature. Seminar topics for each season are chosen by the board of directors in a brainstorming session, which will actually take place very soon for the topics for next summer, and a voting process. And we consistently strive to put together an eclectic mix of topics that we think are current and that will inform you about important public policy issues of the day. Next week, we will be hearing from Professor Ricardo Hausman of Harvard University, who will be discussing the pros and cons of green technology. And the following week, for the final seminar of this season, we will hear from Professor Samuel Issacharoff, who is a distinguished constitutional law scholar at NYU Law School. And he will be talking about the constitutional underpinnings of democracy and the role of the courts, another very timely topic. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. First, as is our tradition, there will be an audience Q&A with a speaker at the conclusion of his talk tonight. You are most welcome to submit questions at any time during the talk using your smartphone, either by going on the Wi-Fi for strings. All the information is right here behind me, and getting on the pigeonhole.at app, or you can use the QR code, which is listed here as well, and it's on the back of your program. Second, voice recordings of all seminars are available usually about 2 to 3 days after the event, as well as video recordings. And we encourage you to share those with friends and perhaps people outside of the local area who may be interested in knowing about seminars. We also have a collaborative arrangement with KUNC Radio, and voice recordings will be posted on their website as well. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, on behalf of the board of directors of seminars, I want to express our sincere thanks and appreciation to the sponsors and the co-sponsors and all of the donors who help us to make it possible to bring you these timely and important talks free of any admission charge. The sponsors for this week's seminar are Anne Van Cleek and Jim Smeeting, and the co-sponsor is Gay Rowan. Please join me in thanking them. Donations do help keep seminars free of charge, and you can contribute either by going to the seminar's website, or you can also now use Venmo, and there's a QR code for that on your program as well. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator of tonight's seminar, Dr. Anne Van Cleek, who is a former member of the board of Seminars at Steamboat, and she recently retired from a distinguished academic career as a professor and research scholar at the Collier Center for Communications Disorder in the School of Behavioral and Brain Science at the University of Texas at Dallas. Please welcome Anne Van Cleek to the stage to introduce tonight's speaker.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. There's many other places you could be this afternoon. You could be floating on the Yampa. You could be at happy hour watching people float on the Yampa. You could be bicycling. You could be playing pickleball. But you are here, and you are why Steamboat is such a very special town, so thank you. So before I introduce our distinguished guest, I wanted to share why this afternoon's topic resonates so personally with me. I grew up the fourth of 6 children, and in our home, college just wasn't something that was ever discussed. I was the only one of my family to go straight from high school to a 4-year university. Eventually, I earned a master's degree, PhD, became a university professor at UT Austin at the age of 26, and was invited to share my research at universities and conferences around the world. But during those travels, I often found that I was the one who was being educated, from spending 6 weeks in South Africa as apartheid crumbled, to walking the streets of East Berlin and Potsdam not long after the wall came down. Few things have shaped my life as profoundly as higher education. It broadened my view of the world and gave me a sense of purpose. But the role of higher education goes far beyond personal transformation. At their very best, universities are engines of opportunity, centers of innovation, and cornerstones of our democracy. They're places where knowledge, inquiry, and civic responsibility come together in the service of the common good. Today, as you heard from Mitch just now, that ideal is under serious threat. Public confidence in universities has plummeted. Concerns about cost and relevance are very understandably growing. Undergraduate education often takes a back seat to research, or one could say it's even in the trunk in some institutions. Debates over DEI, free expression, and institutional neutrality are intensifying. Severe cuts to research funding are jeopardizing our global leadership and triggering a brain drain of our very best scientists. As these and other economic, cultural, political, and economic pressures mount, we have to ask, what's really at stake? And not just for our colleges and universities, but for the very health of our democracy. To help us explore that question, I'm honored to introduce our speaker. Dr. Ted Mitchell is president of the American Council on Education, the nation's leading voice for colleges and universities. You'll find highlights of his distinguished career in your program, but let me emphasize this. Dr. Mitchell's leadership comes at a moment of profound challenge, and with it, the opportunity for meaningful, lasting, and in many cases, really sorely needed change. He's been a powerful advocate for equity and access, academic freedom, and the public mission of higher education. He reminds us that colleges are not just economic engines or political battlegrounds. They are democratic institutions, vital to the civic and moral health of our nation, imperfect though they may be. In many ways, seminars at Steamboat reflects the very values we most need our universities to uphold: civic dialogue, public learning, and democratic engagement. That's why today's conversation is so timely and so very vital. So without further ado, in what we might call Steamboat's very own TED Talk, please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Ted Mitchell.
Yeah, thank you, Ann. Thanks, Ann, and thanks, Mitch, and thanks all of you for foregoing all of those great opportunities that Ann mentioned to be here this afternoon. I come with props. First, wherever I go, and I never get stopped in airports for this, and I'm not sure why yet. Higher ed builds America. We'll talk about that. More important, though, is the collection of bumper stickers that I now have about Steamboat. And I'm looking forward to making mine. I came for the talk and stayed for the library. And I do want to talk to whoever's responsible about whether I could just live there. Because this is a whole lot nicer than Washington, D.C. on a good day. And we haven't had many of those lately. So I can't tell you how happy I am to be here, to be with you. And, quite frankly, to stretch my mind a little bit to address this topic. And so I thank you for helping me get out of the day-to-day and think not just about tactics, not just about strategy, but about the why, about the values that got us all started in higher education. And my biography is different from yours. My grandfather was a prison guard. My father was a high school principal, and I do what I do. And we debate about whether the career trajectory is going up or down. But we'll get into a little bit more of that. But I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk a little bit about why higher education matters so much, for all of the reasons that Ann suggested, and to focus on the interchange between higher education and democracy. And Ann mentioned two things that I want to keep in mind. When we think about democracy, we can think about sort of the bread and butter of voting and participating in civic events, being on boards, and so on. And I think that that's sort of the small p political part of what it means to be an active participant in a democratic society. And the other is an economic part of it. It's really hard to behave the way we would like people to behave as citizens if they can't see their way in the society to make a living, to support their families, and to be better off than they might have been. And so I'm going to cross back and forth between the economic and the small p political, because I think both are essential to higher education's role in building a democracy. We're having our moment, aren't we? Higher ed is in everybody's gun sights. It's on everybody's hit list or moan list, and the headlines just scream out at us every day. And we'll get to some of that, but I'm going to start in a place that I imagine you haven't expected me to start, which is what Americans think about higher education and what part of it we in higher education ought to own. So Mitch and Ann mentioned that the support for American higher education has declined over time. It has declined indeed precipitously. Fewer than half of Americans have high or medium confidence in higher education. We look for good news wherever we can find it. So Gallup did a new survey a couple of weeks ago, and that number moved from 36% to a robust 42. It's kind of like, hey, hey, ho, ho, we want to be number 43. Doesn't quite work. So we've got a ways to go, and I want to talk a little bit about that. And as I do, I also want to just tweak you a little bit. How many of you went to community college? Nice. How many of you went to a 4-year residential college? Awesome. How many of you have graduate degrees? Great. You're smarter than I am, so this is all about who could I make fun of with. So the community colleges are really going to get it. Any quick shout outs for what percentage of enrolled undergraduates attend Ivy League institutions? 1.5. How much ink is spent on the Ivy League in major national newspapers? More than 1%, right? It's like 99.4. And so what I'm leading to is we actually have a very odd perception of higher education that is geared to and guided by news about, won't even be facts, but news about a very, very small group of institutions that are educating a very, very small group of students. The collective first-year class last year of all the Ivy League institutions was 11,000 students. That's everybody. The entering class at USC, that's the University of Spoiled Children. Don't like that? University of Second Choice. I got a bunch of them. Stanford, it's part of the Stanford thing, you got to know. Was 10,000. The entering class at the University of Florida, 10.5. Yay, Florida, go Florida. So again, the point is easy to make, is that our idea of what higher education is very badly skewed toward institutions who may be doing worse than the Ivy League, but just in terms of the math are probably doing a much better job at the things that we care about, and we'll get back to that in a moment. Let me tell you a little bit about the narrative about higher education. It goes like this: don't go. And that's what Peter Thiel says, that's what Elon Musk has said, that's what lots of people say. And why not? Well, it's too expensive and you don't get your money's worth out of it. We'll come back to that. And let's remember in the narrative, by the way, if you are dumb enough to go, here's your life. You're likely not to finish. You'll leave with a ton of debt that will compromise your ability to make adult decisions for the rest of your life. You'll likely be unemployed because they won't teach anything that's worth it. You'll live in your parents' basement until you're 40. And the thing about that one is that doesn't create fright among students. But man, when I put that one out for parents, it's like, run for the exits. And then last but not least, you will be a brainwashed, woke robot when you leave. So that's a problem. If you go back to that number, if somewhere around 40% of people think that that's what describes higher education, is it any wonder that we are at the tail end of a lot of antagonism, at the tail end of a lot of accusations, at the tail end of a lot of sub-regulatory deal-making that's putting institutions on their back foot? Let me go one level deeper. What do people like about higher education? Well, they like two things. They like that that 24% of people who answer the question, who like higher education, say they like it because it creates opportunities for students. That's pretty much on the economic side. 30% of those who like higher education say it's because it creates public good, creates good citizens. Okay, so that's, those are the two things that seem to be patterned into people's thinking. What do they don't like? 32% of people who are on the other side who don't like higher education say that you've got no skills coming out. And 38% of people who don't like higher education say that it's because of an ideologically driven political agenda that dominates higher ed. These are numbers we have to pay attention to. They're important, they're real, and they motivate action. Just because I'm sure one of you is thinking about it, cost is actually on the downside, and about 20% of people think it's just too expensive. What's really interesting is that in neither the plus side or the minus side does the word or the concept of research come up. It's not what people like about higher education, it's not what people don't like about higher education. We've been reading about research in depth for the last several weeks. I want to talk a little bit about that because it's not about research per se, it's about research as a tool of addressing some of these other issues, and we'll get to that. But what it says to me, and this is going to be a theme that I'm going to come back to, is that when America thinks about higher education, they think about undergraduate teaching and learning. And we fool ourselves in the academy when we say, oh, but it's the research we do. Oh, but it's the football team we have. Oh, sorry. Oh, but we never said that at Stanford, by the way. But, and I think the but is really important because it suggests what I've been trying to do with my colleagues in the American Council, which is everybody, all the colleges and universities in America, is to say, we need to focus on job one. And job one is to provide an effective undergraduate education to the people who come to our front door. And unless we do that, we will not have the permission to do all the other things that we do, starting with research. We are not going to win the hearts and minds of America by touting the research that we do, however important it is. We will win the hearts and minds of America if we provide a college education that is affordable and effective. So let's go back to my narrative. For a long time, and by the way, I took that bullet point list from my interview for this job 8 years ago. When I said, there's a negative narrative about higher education, and here's what it looks like, bang, 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 bang. So one might then suggest that I've failed utterly, since that's what I said I wanted to address, and here we are, and I'm addressing it again. But I think it's only gotten worse. Why has it gotten worse? Because there is truth in every one of those elements of the narrative. And until higher education realizes that we are a part of the problem, we're not going to be able to turn the tide. That's hard news for a lot of my colleagues who really are working hard every day to do the right thing, and they're doing a ton of it. But in the aggregate, we're not doing so well. So what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, you won't finish. America has had a stagnant college completion rate for 25 years. 40% of the people who come to college don't finish. So think about that. You're a college president, you greet this class of 500 or 8,000. Every single one of them has showed up at your door because they want a degree. They didn't show up because they want football tickets. Well, maybe. And only a few of them showed up because they want to join the NFL. But the fact of the matter is 40% leave. And of that 40%, half of them do leave with debt. The number one demographic for loan defaults in the student loan crisis that we have are people who have some college and no degree. So they've paid for some portion of college, they've left without the degree, which means they don't have the degree premium, which is still quite significant. You still make $1 million over the course of your lifetime more if you have a college degree than if you left college as a senior with 3 courses left. It's this weird sort of not linear thing. So they leave without the degree bump, they've got debt, and they can't pay it off. The average defaulted loan, despite what you might read, is not $200,000, it's 10. And so the people who are really weighed down by these debts are these small amounts of money they can't release with bankruptcy, they ruin their credit ratings, and they're in trouble. So, here we go, right? You aren't going to finish. You are going to leave with a bunch of debt. Universities have been historically resistant to connect what happens on campus with the world of work. How many of you went to your career center before senior spring? Right, fewer than went to a community college. But just counting, by the way. Any of you had gone to a community college? Never mind. So we undervalue the world of work. We have a sort of snotty attitude toward using, vocational things. And that has come to tell the tale of a lack of vigor in a job market that is, as you know, changing really, really rapidly. So we're 0 for 3, I think, on my list, right? I don't have demographics about the parents' basement thing, but given crowd response, I think it's pretty real. And then my own experience with a 23-year-old who went to one of these celebrity institutions, who's been living in my basement for 2 years, I can see where this comes from. And then the last one, you will be a brainwashed, woke robot. This is the hardest one. It's the hardest one for the academy to face up to. But it's true. Not the robot part, and probably not even the woke part. But there has been an ideological shift since about 1960 to the left side of the political spectrum, and that has worked its way through the academy, through hiring, promotion, and tenure to create a faculty that is pretty stiffly aligned with the left side of the political aisle. And so if you go back to the numbers that I was talking about at the very beginning, you could do one more analysis, which is how do Democrats and Republicans divide? Well, not surprisingly, Republicans have a much more dour view of higher education than Democrats do. And if you take the party affiliations away and you ask conservative and liberal or progressive, same thing happens. Liberals and progressives are much happier with the curriculum. They're much happier with what's going on. Perhaps they don't need jobs. And so, sorry, that was really not called for. That was not called for. But you get the point. And so I think that there too, we have a lot to answer for. We saw that emerging. It's interesting, David Brooks wrote an article about when the academy really started to move. And he pinpointed a winter's day in 1986 when a couple of the editors of the Dartmouth Review, Laura Ingram and Dinesh D'Souza, went to the local John Deere rental place and rented a tractor and mowed down the anti-apartheid shanties on the Dartmouth Green. And he points to that as the moment in which the split between right and left happened. And when you had to be on one side or the other, it became very tribal. You had to be A or B. It was an interesting morning. I was there. And I'm happy to have been a part of that historical moment. I'll leave it at that. So, I think we're really facing inside higher education. We're facing some truths that we haven't wanted to really address in a very long time. And I think at the core of it is this idea of ideological diversity. I mean, we really need to attend to ways of broadening the aperture of the academic profession and introduce more diverse voices on the faculty side to be able to encourage more students to broaden their aperture as they think about how to comport themselves, whether it's in class or in the community. And I want to settle here for a moment because it really is one of the reasons why this is such an extraordinary event. Imagine a map that has a right and a left. And there is a middle, and there's a middle space that's empty. Right now, the right has a space, and the left has a space, and there's no one in the middle. Colleges and universities need to occupy that middle, need to be aggressive in occupying that middle. And I'll talk in a minute about why that's so hard. But think about what it means to be subject to the left's ideological imposition. Surveys been done for the last 4 or 5 years. They get worse, successively worse. We've asked students how free they feel to express themselves in class, out of class. In class was always pretty safe. It's not anymore. Out of class, never been safe. Only about 35% of students say that they feel confident in saying what they want, what they think outside of class. That's not good. And so the left is responsible for the part of it that was the cancel culture. It's the culture that wouldn't allow speakers from the right to speak, wouldn't allow them to express their First Amendment rights, and shouted people down. The left is the group that's responsible for creating, there was a fad for maybe 8 or 9 months, word lists. Words that you couldn't say because they might be seen as a microaggression or trigger a response from students who were of a different race, a different background, a different heritage. When the word cotton appears on that list, my view, just as one guy, you've kind of gone too far. The left, a couple more. In San Francisco, they had a referendum on whether to rename a high school that was named after Senator Feinstein because of 2 votes that she had taken in the Senate. It's too far. We could do mascots, we could do Confederate statues. I have different opinions about all of those, but the point is, there was a rigid line. You were either with us or against us, and there was no gray area. Other side, slavery was a jobs program. Thank you, Governor DeSantis. There are plenty on the right as well. I'll just leave it there. But I wanted to illustrate the ones on the left because I think we give them a pass. We give ourselves a pass, right? I'm a dyed-in-the-wool progressive, and I think we went too far. And we're paying the price for it. DEI, it's a perfect example. We went too far. I'll give you an example. I talked about this at dinner last night. When I knew, the DEI had gotten too routinized, too professionalized, too rigid, and when I knew we were going to have an anti-Semitism revolt, was when we held a session in New York on anti-Semitism on campus 4 years ago. And Jewish students, one after another, said, we're not allowed in the DEI conversation. Our inclusion, the diversity of our experience, the history of prejudice against us doesn't count. So that overweighted what did count, it underweighted what Jewish students were feeling, and boy did we come to terms with that last spring, and it continues. So the point that I'm making here is that on this issue of ideological diversity, which I think is the hardest of these to deal with, we need to occupy the center space. And we need to do that very deliberately. We need to do that by creating places where conservative voices are heard more than they are now. That probably will not be the sociology department at Harvard. Stanford, yes. Harvard, no. Got to get them in when I can. But it's quite likely to be the center for something that will enable people to come to campus, to be recognized, to have status, to have students around them, to help people give voice to ideas that aren't on the ideological left. The left has done that for a long time, created centers and institutes for one thing and another. It's time that we balanced that. Eventually, I would love to balance it in the tenured faculty. I won't live that long, but hopefully we can make some moves. And really, without being the Stanford person that I am, the Hoover Institution's relationship to Stanford is actually a really good example. So the Hoover Institution hires distinguished faculty members across the disciplines. They give them the equivalent of tenure. They oftentimes have joint appointments across the green in other departments, but they have a center, they have gravity. And we need to do that more in more of our institutions. The other ones are easy. So how do you help people complete? Well, you help them complete. You don't just accept them and then ignore them. You have advisement programs that work. You have computer systems that see when students are sort of falling off the academic cliff, and you have ways of reaching them. You identify places where very small grants can help a student finish. City University of New York has a great program in which they will identify students who need a Metro card or who need $200 to get the radiator fixed on their car. Because if they don't come to class, they're gonna fall behind and they're gonna drop out. So getting jobs that matter. When you look at this issue of completion, they're tied. The number one thing that keeps students in school are internships. Better than financial aid, better than a good football team. If they have the opportunity to try themselves out in the world of work and connect that back in some way to what they're doing, they will finish and they will prosper. So that's the minor league stuff. The major league stuff is all around the issue of ideological diversity. So let me pause. This will be the intermission in which I entertain you with quotes from our founding fathers. And then I want to turn the other way. What does it mean for the United States to support democracy through education? And these are the things that we read about in the headlines. But first of all, we come to all of this stuff about education and the country honestly. Thomas Jefferson, you may have known where I was headed. An educated citizenry is a vital requisite for our survival as a free people. It's not much ambiguity there. John Adams, the diffusion of knowledge is the only guarantee of freedom and liberty. Washington and Hamilton had a plan to create a national university to instill the cultural and political values of America in a leadership class. It was seen as too elitist, and so it didn't happen. And so now we have Harvard. I forgot to ask, how many Harvard grads? Okay, so I can keep going. How many Stanford grads? Oh, I'm in trouble. I'm in real trouble. Benjamin Rush, who was a Philadelphia physician, he was George Washington's doctor in the Continental Army, and was kind of a gadfly and did a lot of work in Philadelphia with Franklin, and wrote a lot about education. And one of the things that he was confident about is that we should create an education system in which the first words out of a child's mouth would be the lisping tone of Washington. He also said, a little bit less eloquently, a Republican government implies a sound education, and a sound education requires public schools. So, first public school law, the Northwest Ordinance, first law passed by Congress. We've been at this for quite a while. And so the connection between democracy and education has been a strong one. And it has worked in two directions. It's worked from the education side, which I've tried to talk about, and it's also worked from the government side. So what's the government done? The government has done a couple of really amazing things. The moral acts that started land-grant colleges and universities. The moral acts were an attempt by Congress to say, we're done with education just for the elites, and we want higher education. We want all of this knowledge, we want it to permeate through all of the classes of society. And so they created state university right, across the country. And their mission was to educate farmers and mechanics. That's why we have A&M behind some of those names. And why did they do that? Because they wanted those people not only to know what the best science was, but they wanted them to be ready to participate in democracy fully. So we created a whole system of education to promote democracy. Community colleges. No such thing as community colleges before about 1940. There were some junior colleges, and they were usually, I know that we like to think that athletic problems only started with name, image, and likeness, but the first junior colleges were actually places where athletes went to shine themselves up to be able to go to college. But we created a community college system that was designed to do two things: help low-income people get ready to transfer to four-year institutions, and provide job training and lifelong learning to the broad populace. That's about as democratic as you can get. It didn't work seamlessly, so we needed to do a couple things in addition. After World War I, the government decided that they took a look around and they said, you know, we did a great thing in recruiting all these young men, mostly, and women to go fight in Europe. And now they're coming back, and guess what? We forgot that we took them out of high school. And so they actually came to our organization and said, could you do something about that? And we built the GED test. We still have the GED test. World War II, same problem. GI Bill changed the demographics of American higher education completely, much to the chagrin of the presidents of Harvard. They weren't alone. And you know, along through that time, Stanford had a quota against Jews. And they relieved themselves of that burden along the way. The Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act opened the doors to many, many more people who hadn't had access before. All of those were things that were done by the government to support higher education's commitment to democracy and to building it and spreading it and deepening it. The one more happened also after World War II. A man named Vannevar Bush was commissioned to talk about great scientific advances during World War II, most of them having to do with arms and armaments. Nonetheless, advanced physics remarkably, advanced chemistry remarkably. The question was, where do we want as a society to put research? And unlike Europe, where they have research institutes that are separated from almost everything, Bush recommended, and the US government agreed, that we would house basic research in American universities. And we would task them not only with undergraduate education, but we would task them with building the infrastructure and coming up with the ideas in medicine, in technology, in health, in construction. And so the golden age of American higher education research started in about 1947 and continued until about January 23rd. But who's counting? And so I want to talk about the government's seeming retreat from this kind of very steady support of higher education. And I want to talk about it in an even-handed way, right? Different administrations want to do different things, and sometimes they make mistakes, and sometimes they don't. I know that it looks a lot like I only dislike this administration, but I'll let you read some of the things I wrote about universal loan forgiveness, which I think was probably the worst idea any Democrat ever had. But be that as it may, a couple of things have happened to that compact between higher ed and the American government. First of all, the background is this loss of confidence. That this government has far more leeway to intervene in higher ed than most governments before because of this lack of confidence. There's a kind of they sort of suck anyway, so I don't care. And so that creates a playing field in which the administration has a broad sweep of actions that it can take and has taken. And so one of them has been these freezes on research funding. And the freezes on research funding, freeze is a nice word because it sounds temporary. But freezing, let's be really direct. Freezing research means firing the research staff. It means letting the cultures die because you don't have the money to keep them alive that are leading to new discoveries in medicine. It means shutting down physics labs that are trying to get at some of the very basic understandings of material. And it's also depriving pharma, venture capital, and a number of other industries of the ideas that are the next generation of ideas that are going to propel the American economy and American society. So we are, by freezing these funds, even if they were to come back tomorrow, enough damage would be done that it would take us a generation to recover. And so I worry most about that. Do I worry about anti-Semitism? You bet I do. But do I think that freezing research funding is going to help a single Jewish student? No. Do I think it's going to help a single Jewish faculty member? No. Do I think that it's going to stop people from saying from the river to the sea? No. There are processes in place to do all of those things. Help Jewish students, help Jewish faculty, clamp down on speech that is out of bounds because it's threatening. And the thing that is, to me, most disturbing about this government is that rather than using those policies, those procedures, they simply connect one bad with a lot of money, and they say we're going to bring people to the table simply by threatening their research money. It's not the right way to do business. And if you want to circle back, what does higher education owe democracy? We talked a lot about that. Undergraduate education, research. What does the government owe higher education? To be a model of democracy, to abide by the rule of law, to adhere to established processes, to use evidence rather than accusation as a way of dealing with supposed transgressions. So I worry, just be very honest, I worry that we've reversed what has been a centuries-long positive and productive relationship between higher education and the government to produce the most vibrant democracy in the world. And we all have to have things to do about it. I'm going to focus on the things that I can control, which are creating some content in this middle space, working with institutions to do that. And I hope that Congress and the executive branch will do their part by coming across halfway and saying, here's what is really bothering us. If it's the woke ideology, guess what? We can shake hands on that. But let's deal with that in a direct way, not through threats and sequestering of money. I want to say one other thing about that middle space that I think is important to remember, is that higher education, that the students we get every generation are different, and every 4 years they're different. And so, we're now dealing with the COVID intake, and that's hard because students are coming in less prepared in mathematics, less prepared in English and language arts, and mostly underprepared in social skills. Did I get it right? Okay. And so that's one, right? Two, students coming to higher education are coming from the most segregated residential neighborhoods since World War II, just because of the way the economy has changed the demographics of neighborhoods. That's two. Three, they're coming from the most racially segregated public schools since Brown, which is connected to the neighborhoods. And so they come to college campuses, and we expect them to be able to have substantive, civil conversations with people they've never encountered before, and ideas they've never. Oh, and I forgot the social media that intentionally segregates people, right? So we're kind of trying to make bricks without straw here. And I will say, from our point of view, college presidents are completely incapable of dealing with that. We have not trained them at all in how to do that. And so I need to do that. We need to do that to be able to create the environment for that middle space to take life, because it's not going to do it on its own. We're going to have to teach, we're going to have to work, we're going to have to draw lines and say to people, that's not okay, in ways that are going to make people uncomfortable. And I think higher education has gotten way too comfortable with itself and way too comfortable with the idea that it can just be comfortable. So that's what I got for you today. I'm happy to answer any questions and look forward to the conversation. Hi, Anne.
Hi. So thank you, Dr. Mitchell. That was very enlightening and really balanced. I think everybody really appreciates that. There are certainly issues in higher education, and they have been growing for a long time, and this is an opportunity, I think, this crisis period that universities are in for some of these things to be addressed. So I'll turn to some of the audience questions. One that several people were interested in. With political polarization at historic levels, maybe there have been other historic levels, and declining civic participation among young Americans, what specific roles should universities play in preparing students not just for careers, but for democratic citizenship? And how do we do this without being accused of indoctrination?
Time to go. Thanks, it's been great. Library. So that is the question, and I can't tell you. It's heartwarming and annoying at the same time. The number of emails I get a day from somebody who has the great idea that they're going to start a group that is going to go to campuses around the country and turn students into citizens. I mean, I bet I get 10 a day. And they're all right, and they all have great ideas. One of the things in education in general is we can't coordinate ourselves out of a bag. But that's a different story for a different day. So I think a couple of things. First of all, I think that institutions need to take their own civic engagement seriously. So if I talked for a moment about the government needing to model good citizenship in the rule of law and so on, universities need to model civic engagement with the communities they're in. And the town gown thing of historical fame, it's real. And I think that that's the place to start, is let's model what we need to do. Let's open our library to high school students who are going to come onto our campus and need a place to study because they don't have anywhere to go. Let's make sure that all the performances are available. Let's look at the businesses, and let's see if we can't get our students who are either in the business program or something else to do case studies about how to help them grow or whatever their challenge is. So I think that's where it starts. It starts with the adults. And then I think it moves to some of the easy things. There have been endless voter drives. I think it's really important. for students to vote. But prior to that, I think it's really important for students to have an opportunity to hear debates among their peers about who to vote for and what to do. So having grown up in California where the ballot propositions sort of go to 70 pages, that's an interesting experiment. These are the students who are enrolled in college in California get to vote on all these propositions. Do they have any idea what they're about? No. But can the university create a way to have an open dialogue about these and have a sort of a debate style? You just get assigned the pro, you get assigned the con. So I think that there are lots of things that we can do to make it more interesting and accessible.
Okay. Tuition increases are matched by increases in government, private student loan opportunities. Therefore, there's not an obvious incentive for universities to cap tuition, despite the inability of graduates or those who are not graduating that you talked to us about to pay back their loans. How do you see the recent legislation, affecting this? And how do we find balance in paying professors and researchers competitive salaries?
So, I really should have left 5 minutes ago. This tuition and financial aid, it's a great cocktail party. If you ever find yourself in a room of economists, sorry if you do, but this is a way to distract them, is to ask them what they think about the Bennett hypothesis, which is this hypothesis that as the government raises financial aid, institutions will just raise price. Maybe, but it's not clear that it is not. The reason it's a good cocktail party conversation is that economists do not agree. So their tuition. We in higher education have a basic problem that maybe you can solve for me. So we were talking about NYU at dinner last night. Sticker price for NYU for next year is $94,000. Right. The average student, if you go on the college scorecard, where it lists what people pay, 42. And so the problem is, we're like hotels. We have a rack rate that we have to advertise in order to get the 3 people to pay $94,000. And then we tier it all the way down. It's called the discount rate. And one of the things that has happened in private higher education is that the discount rate has now gone over 50% for the first time. And that means that they're taking money from the affluent, they're putting it into scholarships for others. So it's really unclear whether, if you're asking this question about the relationship to aid, whether you should be measuring the 94 or the 42. The average student loan has not changed much in 15 years. It's gone up from inflation, but it's still only about $30,000. And again, it's something that we don't read about because we read about the dentist living at the top of a mountain in Utah driving a Tesla and defaulting on his $200,000 loan. I got him. I found him on the way home. Took him out.
So we have a lot of people interested in this question. There's a contradiction in how most prestigious universities operate. Their mission of serving society, advancing knowledge, but at the same time, they maintain what you might call a luxury good model where exclusivity preserves prestige. If Harvard believed in its democratic mission, why not leverage its very, very huge endowment to create multiple campuses worldwide, expanding access rather than rejecting such a huge proportion of its applicants?
So I think Harvard's acceptance rate is 3%. I was giving a talk at Spelman College a couple of years ago when Frank Bruni wrote this tongue-in-cheek article about Stanford deciding not to take any students. And he kind of went through, Susie Q, blah, 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 and, the Stanford admissions person saying, oh, she'll be fine at Yale. And the thing that was frightening about it is that the Spelman students thought it was serious. And I really had to kind of go, wait. And so, this notion of exclusivity is really a poison. I think Michael Crow, who's the president of Arizona State, has been leading the charge in saying we should be appreciating institutions for the people they take, not the people they reject. And I think that that's right. Prestige is a really hard thing to give up, and it's a really hard thing to give up unilaterally. And so for any Ivy League institution to do that, I think would be, and I'm not sure they're going to do it. Two other things. We all know that endowments really aren't a bank account, that they're a series of 1,000 contracts that the institution makes with a donor. And so while I would love to have $58 billion to play with, the fact of the matter is that those $58 billion are already spoken for. The endowment tax that's going to be levied on them will be a challenge to some of the institutions. But the endowment is sort of secondary. I think if Harvard really cared about expanding its brand, if Stanford really thought about expanding its brand, it would do things like create a set of community colleges that would be free. They would, I'm not sure about going abroad, but they would provide research fellowships to undergraduates who are going to historically black colleges and universities. That they could do something big like the community colleges, or smaller things to really provide opportunities for people who don't have the wherewithal. If that doesn't happen, Larry Bacco, who was I lose track of how many Harvard presidents there have been since Larry now, but when he came in, this idea of the community colleges was a live one for him. He wanted to create a network of community colleges in the Boston area that would be free, that would be connected to the Harvard faculty. It didn't go well with the Harvard faculty. And so decision-making is another part of this. And interestingly, the faculty are the ones who are most often resistant to losing that prestige and that elite status. Can I go back to the previous question to elaborate? The cost model of higher education is the other part of the price deal, not just the financial aid. But as research has become more and more important in American higher education, I would say overly important, faculty have been hired for their research potential, which means their ability to get grants, but also for their research productivity, even in places where they're not getting a lot of grant funding. And so to support faculty to do that, they often are released from teaching. And so you have a faculty member who is being paid a full-time faculty salary, being required to teach half of that, and the university then has to hire somebody else to teach those courses. It's a zero sum, but this particular zero sum ends up to be at least 1.5. And that's a real problem for our cost structure.
So there's been a lot of talk over the last decade or even longer about the return on investment of higher education. Is it keeping up with the need for students to have the kinds of skills in artificial intelligence or just other aspects of very, very fast-moving technology? And are universities responding quickly enough to those, well, I guess there's just a lot of people who can get very high-paying jobs without the degree because they can go the certificate route and Thank you very much. Don't need the debt or anything else. So it's back to that return on investment question. Yeah. Is it
colleges and universities have not responded quickly, which is why it's in my hit list of things that we need to do. We need to respond more nimbly to the needs of the labor market and to the needs of our students to get jobs. We did a survey my first year at ACE, and we did focus groups around the country of parents of people who are applying to college. And what are they after? The consultant came back and he said, I wish I could only charge you $100,000, but I have to charge you $300,000 because there are 3 words: jobs, jobs, and jobs. So I felt jobbed by that whole exchange. But look, it's really important, and we haven't paid attention to it. And we will not get there with the faculty we have.
Interesting.
So what are the solutions? Part of the solution is to bring people in to teach courses who have more practical experience. The second solution, Northeastern is probably the best example, is to create co-op programs where students balance their in-class time with out-of-class time. It's sort of internships on steroids. And the third alternative, which is starting, is to give students credit for work they do, mostly online, to develop marketable skills. Example, Google offers a bunch of certificates, right? You've seen them all advertised, Grow with Google. Well, at the University of Texas, you can now take up to 4 Grow with Google certificates and embed them in your transcript. They count for the University of Texas credit. And that's just the beginning. So I think we're going to have a place where big universities, rather than going through their faculty and trying to get this to get done, so they're going to go right to industry. And they're going to get as far as a certificate, where you can be a history major at the University of Texas and come out with a certificate in data engineering from Google. And I think that's the way universities are going to catch up, because they're just not going to do it with the faculty we have.
So kind of a follow-up question to that, are universities preparing students adequately to be the lifelong learners that they will very much have to be as technology continues to grow and change at such a phenomenal pace?
No.
Okay.
Have any others?
Fair enough.
I think, it's funny. So these are really complicated institutions, and they have just this really rich history. So Clark Kerr, who was the chancellor at the University of California, whose most famous line after Ronald Reagan excused him from his job, and this was in another time of turmoil, he went to the podium and he said, "I leave as I arrived, fired with enthusiasm." So where was I headed with Clark? So Clark Kerr gave a famous lecture in which he talked about universities as a stabilizing force in Western civilization. And he said, look, if you look at institutions that have persisted in basically their same formulation for over 1,000 years, you have the Parliament of the Isle of Man, the Catholic Church, and universities. So for him, that was great. Try to change it. And I think that's one of our big issues is that we have the historical overlay. Go to graduation and these silly robes that we all wear. They come from centuries ago, and people eat that stuff up.
So I think I'll change gears here and move to a very different topic. So President Roth of Wesleyan called Columbia's payment to the administration ransom, but something you may have to do to save the kid. Do you agree?
Michael and I are old friends. We worked together at the Getty Museum for a couple of years. He and I trade off who gets to be the bad cop. So I think my comments were a little more measured than his. I think I said something like Columbia was being crushed, and they felt that they needed to do this in order to survive, and they will do what they do. The most important thing for me, though, is that this can't be a model for anything. And I think that that's one of the things about the structure of these discussions between institutions and the government is there's no policy being made here. There's no policy being made. These are just deals. And so a Columbia deal is going to be a Columbia deal. A Harvard deal is going to be a Harvard deal. I'm waiting for them, as I said to the secretary, please come to the table and let's talk about policy. I'll talk about anything with you about policy. But this is not policy making.
Okay, I'm going to circle back around again to, I guess, kind of the issue of return on investment in one respect. Do you think undergraduate education, if we're moving toward certification and other things along those lines, is supposed to be a trade school, or, as we've talked about for many, many, many years, an opportunity to learn to read, to write, to think deeply, become the kind of informed citizen you were talking about early. So how do we deal with those two competing issues?
It's a great question and a fundamental one. And I think that among the many mistakes that we make in education is that we're particularly susceptible to either ors, and we don't really say what should be obvious is yes and. And I think that this is the perfect example of that. And Texas, I think, is a great example. I think if you look at the fluctuations in the job market, learning how to learn is going to be a chief asset. And I think that that's one of the things that we do well in a 4-year liberal arts education is we help people learn how to learn, how to find information, how to decode information, how to understand truth from fiction. All of that's great and indispensable. And I think it can be leavened with real job skills. And we have to take that with a grain of salt. Vocational education has always been a generation behind. It just has been. Whether you're talking about machines in the 1910s or AI today, it's going to be behind. So how can you help people develop the skills, the meta skills? And so I think it's quite clear that that's what we need to do is we need to combine them. But this ROI thing I didn't answer directly before, and I'll try now. We've just done a whole new classification of every institution of higher education in the country. If you want to look up your favorite institution, it's carnegieclassifications.org. And we're looking at access and student success measured in terms of earnings. So we've looked at every college in the country. And the frightening thing, and it's probably basically an ROI thing, the frightening thing is that there are colleges in this country whose graduates don't make as much as a high school graduate from the same area.
Wow.
And there are more than 100 of them. Right? They have no business being in operation.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that we have to take seriously is that's a stain on the whole environment. But if you don't have an ROI that's at least 1.5, you're not successful.
Okay. So something we haven't really touched upon, if we go back to the Kelvin report from the University of Chicago, which encourages institutional neutrality so that the debate and the hopefully moving away from the left-wing orthodoxy of the academy in general, is among faculty and students, but the institution itself should be neutral and not take any kind of political stance whatsoever. And then on the other hand, there is the idea of diversity, and diversity being looked at as diversity of institutions, offering different things to different people. And I'm very curious where you stand on that.
Yeah, I think by the way, we have to ask this question of ourselves all the time at ACE, because we have to. Just today, I refused to sign a statement that I believe in personally, but I don't think ACE should support. And why did I say that? I think that the institution should speak loudly and strongly for issues that pertain to the guardrails around higher education. So, when it comes to who do we admit, who teaches, and what do they teach, I think the threats to that are a threat to the very basic idea of a university in which there's free expression, in which the search for the truth dominates the culture, et cetera. So I think on those issues, universities should be quite vocal. But on particular issues, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy with it. And if you look at last spring, you had to have a particularly wicked sense of humor. But to watch presidents issue a statement on Tuesday that they then rescinded on Wednesday, and they rewrote on Thursday, and they redid on Friday, it really, I think, was an example of the need to have a gyroscope that's much more centered on some fundamentals rather than having a foreign policy. And I think it really got out of hand when departments in universities decided that they were going to have foreign policies. And imagine, go back to my riff about ideological diversity. Imagine being a candidate for a job at the University of Alabama, and to have the department you want to join issue a statement that's diametrically opposed to the way you do your work, and you think, yeah, that's a place I want to go and work and come up for tenure with the people who are saying that, I'm full of it. So I think moving toward neutrality is right. Finding places to not be neutral is also important.
Yeah. It seems like a very hard kind of line to walk along in many, many respects. So as a final question, I'm really curious, as just a general idea, do you think that universities, they're many of them very long-lived institutions with long histories, change becomes incredibly difficult, surprisingly, since they're supposed to be engines of innovation and change? It turns out in many respects, they're quite the opposite in terms of internal direction changing. Do you feel hope that universities are going to rise to some of the really extreme challenges being placed on them right now and react quickly enough, basically, to save themselves?
Yeah, I'm really optimistic, and it's not just because I have to be to wake up in the morning. I'm optimistic. So thanks, that's a great last question. I'm optimistic because this Carnegie work that we just did, 2 by 2, access and earnings. In the northeast corner, where you want to be, high access, high earnings, there are 479 institutions. And they're in their different groups. So the community colleges are measured against community colleges. Everybody, the Ivy League is measured against the Ivy League. So when I get really depressed, I look at that. There's not one Ivy League institution in the northeast corner. Not one. Does that mean they're bad? No, it just means they got a lot of work to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
Ball State. Go visit Ball State. They're doing it. Blackfeet Community College on the res in Montana. They're doing it. We're depriving ourselves of a great deal of success and a great deal of joy about American higher education by looking at the 9 celebrity institutions that are presented to us every day. We need to look at East Carolina. We need to look at Ball State. We need to look at Cal State Dominguez Hills. These are places that are doing the right thing with their students. They are doing job one. They are getting students in, they're getting students out, and they're providing opportunities for them in the world of work.
and it could be an entire new seminar, but Colorado Mountain College is doing one heck of a job in other respects.
And Colorado. So I love Colorado Mountain College. I said to Ann and Jim yesterday that I think it may be my favorite college in the country. And I really mean that. My former doctoral student just stepped down as the president after 10 years. So Carrie's a good friend as well as a good leader. But look, they don't distinguish between 2-year and 4-year. They don't distinguish between vocational and academic. They exist to provide what students need.
Exactly.
You can't have a better mission statement.
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful note for us to close on. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell.
Thank you.